Good afternoon, team. It's good to see some of you back this month. I see we've got a repeat offender on here. Good to see you. Hope you're having a great day and staying dry, because I think most of the North Island is quite wet today. Yeah, South Island, not so much.
Oh, but who wants to live in the South Island?
Who wants? Yeah, absolutely. All right. So team, we're going to hold off just half a second to ensure that everyone who is registered has logged on, and then we'll get started. All right, I'm going to move this over here. We don't have Jono introducing us today, so we'll introduce ourselves. So for those of you that are on the call today, the webinars that we do are recorded. And if you'd like to have access to the recording, just flick us an email. We're happy to send it out to you so that in case you missed something, you can go back and review. And there are a couple of features on your, Jono's much better at this than me. There's a couple of features on your Zoom taskbar that will help you out today. One is the chat function. So if you go to your toolbar, there should be a chat function down there for you. Sometimes I ask you a question as we go through the session and kind of ask you to chat back to us and tell us your feedback. Other times I'll ask you to, if you've got a question, to put that in the Q&A section. So there's also a Q&A section on your Zoom toolbar. And a little bit later in the session, I will ask you to give some thought to if you have questions that you would like us to answer. So we always leave time at the end for that. So I think without further ado, we will get started. So today's topic is obviously communication. This is one of our favorite topics to teach on and to discuss and to tell people about. I think we've been on soapboxes sometimes.
Yeah, and I think it's because we know we're so different.
Yes.
And, you know, sometimes we think we're communicating when we're not, and being in business for so long, certainly had examples where you thought you were communicating, but it certainly didn't come across the way it was meant to. So, you know, not just the numbers person, but how to make your business work better across the board.
Cool, brilliant. So we're talking about communication today. We're going to be talking through a model called DISC, and we'll explain what that is in just a little bit. So we are Generate Business and Life Solutions. For those of you that may not have been on one of our webinars over the last several months, we always introduce ourselves each time with who we are and what we do. So Craig, just say a little something about yourself. And
chartered accountant, as it says. I've been chartered accounting for quite a while now, but for the last 10 years, I guess, I've been focusing less on the numbers. Numbers are still important, don't get me wrong, but it's all about the holistic nature of being in business and making sure that your business and life solutions are looked after.
Brilliant. Thank you, Craig. So I'm Jennifer Myers. I'm originally from the States, been here in New Zealand for 10 years. And that entire time I've worked with clients as a business coach. And both Craig and I are certified John Maxwell leadership coaches and trainers and certified DISC behavioral styles consultants. That's a mouthful, but basically it just means that we've gone to extra trouble to become specialists in a few areas. So that's what we do. And today what we're going to be covering, parts 1, 2, and 3 are going to be blended together in the discussion because we're talking through the 4 main DISC profile, the 4 DISC profiles, the strengths and challenges of each of those profiles, and how to communicate better with each one. So that's all going to be wrapped up in the first section. We've got a little bit of bonus information we're going to cover for you today, which is a sneak peek into something new. And we're going to give you a special offer at the end and tell you how to get in touch with us. And of course, answer your questions if you have any. So that's us for today. And in case you don't know what we do or you haven't been out to the generate.solutions website, basically what we do with our clients is we help our medical and dental practices across New Zealand to strategize where they want to be, what they want their business to look like, to put plans in place to actually achieve what it is they want to accomplish, to help them grow in a way that suits them. You know, it's not always about more clients. How can you grow in a really smart way so that you're achieving your goals in a profitable way? And what's next when you're finished at the chair or in the exam room? What do you want to do next, right? So that's kind of, we help people from soup to nuts. And how do we do that? We build relationships with our clients. We're a small business, right? We're in the heart of the North Island here in New Zealand, and you know, we're Kiwis dealing with Kiwis. And yes, I'm calling myself a Kiwi. I've been here for 10 years, so I'm a Kiwi now. So we form relationships. We help educate people. We love to share new information, and we have heaps of it at our fingertips, and provide resources that you can share with your team, right? Because it's all about spreading knowledge and spreading helping people to do things better in their practices. All right, a little bit more about us. I'm gonna skip that today. So what we're talking about, so Craig and I are both certified through the John Maxwell team to deliver DISC work, right? So DISC is a method of personality or behavioral styles that is used worldwide to help people understand why they do the things they do.
Yep. And it's interesting, you know, there are other DISC methodologies out there. They're still called DISC, different people. It's the way we approach the DISC information and portray it back to you, the client, that makes us different. And it's amazing how accurate it is. The number of people we've run through it, and you know, you can sit and talk to a person and have a rough idea what they might be, and then the profile report comes out, and boy, you know, it's amazing how accurate it is.
Yeah, no, it's fact. Once you understand, but I think what happens is, and I know you've come across this too, is that when you go into you know, a practice or a business that has done some behavioral profiling, they've done StrengthsFinder, or they've done dotting, or animals, or colors. There's so many different things. They've learned what they are, but they haven't had the follow-up to understand what to do with the information.
That's right. It becomes one of those books on the shelves of systems which we don't like.
Yeah. So we'll talk at the end about the gap between knowing and doing, right? What you do with the information. There we go. So really quickly, wanted to throw a statistic at you. I'm not going to give you a definition today. No word definitions in this particular webinar. And if you go back and you watch some of the old webinars, you'll see that there's always a word definition in these. But today, it's a statistic. So it's numbers. Did you know that 85% of all miscommunication in all settings, right, not just work settings, is due to the fact that the people involved have different behavioral styles? That's it. Quite simple, right? So I think that's fascinating that 85% of miscommunication can be avoided or headed off at the pass if you know a little bit more about how to communicate with different styles. So just like people, right, just like when we notice patterns in nature, patterns are everywhere in nature. So when we learn patterns in nature, we can learn how to also notice patterns in people, because people are different, but they're predictably different, right, in certain ways.
Exactly.
But when we gain a better understanding of how people behave, then we can significantly reduce miscommunication just by being able to recognize patterns and how people are wired to behave. So when we saw those patterns earlier that I popped up there, when we're aware of what the pattern means, then we can anticipate how to approach those various animals, right? The tiger wouldn't be something that I was going to walk up to and, you know, grab its cheeks and say, "Who's a good boy?" Right? I would not do that to a tiger.
Oh, but your cat, you would. What's the difference?
Steve, yes. My cat Steve, he's a bit tigerish, right? He's a baby tiger. So, yeah, and he'd bite my hand off. So, yeah, I wouldn't walk up to a tiger and grab its face and just love on it. I would do that to a dog, but not to a tiger. And the reason I know that is because of the pattern on the coat. It gives me a huge clue as to how to behave around that particular animal. So, yeah.
So don't get us wrong, by us putting animals up here, this isn't an animal personality profile. No. All we're picking on here are the patterns that once you learn the pattern, you can recognize that animal. So we're using the patternness of the animal to take our way through into personality styles.
Yes.
And the patterns behind them.
Cool. Thank you for that. Appreciate that clarification. So when we become aware of the patterns that people exhibit, we not only know what to expect from them, we also know how to prepare for, interact with, and respond to them in order to have a successful connection. All right, so let's dive in really quickly. Have you ever met someone who's really direct? They drive forward, they're bold and decisive. They tend to like being in control. They might be D-wired, right? So, and we'll talk about D's in a second. In fact, a D would likely walk up to you and say, "Craig, I'm taking you to lunch today, and here, give me your keys. I'm gonna drive your car and get us there," right? So those D's love to be in control. Today, we'll talk about how to recognize and connect better with a D if you're not a D. And who do you know who's fun? the life of the party, the popular kid, right? The person who's probably well liked on your team, but tends to be a bit flighty at times, right? So those characteristics kind of indicate that that person might be I-wired. And we'll talk about how to connect best with them. Now, you might have someone on your team, or several of them, or in your family, right? Because what we're talking about today is with every relationship.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Work, home, children.
You might have someone on your team who's kind of the backbone of the practice or the backbone of your family. Someone who can always be counted on to support people and initiatives and projects. They're likely an S-wired individual, someone who kind of just likes being behind the scenes and taking care of everything. And I'm sorry to be rustling papers by our microphone. I'm realizing what we're doing right now. I hope you're not hearing that. Have you ever known somebody who's super neat? There's nothing on the desk except for the one paper they're working on at that moment. They don't seek crowds. They're really quiet and they kind of re-energize by being alone, and they like to work alone. They might very well be C-wired. So we're going to also be talking through how to best manage your communication with C's. Now, I've just gone through D, I, S, and C. None of these things is meant to put people in a box, right? We're not trying to fence you in and say you are a D and that's all you'll ever be, right? Each of us is really a blend of all four of the DISC styles. Some of us might exhibit more of one than another, or some of us might be a blend of three things, but generally, we've got a natural set point, and that's kind of what influences our behavior and our communication in most situations. Yep. Now, when we talk about DISC, and we've talked earlier about the plethora of behavioral and personality tests and styles and whatnot, there are heaps of them, and you've heard of lots and lots, but the idea of characterizing people's behavior started way back in ancient times in Greece and was further developed in 20th century psychology. So back in 444 BC, Empedocles, who was a Greek philosopher, talked about people exhibiting behaviors that he thought kind of went along with the four elements of earth, air, fire, and water. So he recognized that people were different and behaved in a way that he thought was influenced by those four things. So then in 400 BC, Hippocrates kind of expanded on that a bit and said that each of us is affected by four internal fluids, right? And he identified them, and I've heard these words before, as choleric, sanguine, phlegmatic, and melancholy. So many years ago, I had a client come in and he was telling me, I'm like, oh, have you ever heard of DISC? Oh yeah, I've heard of DISC, but oh gosh, I've done, and I forget which one uses these words. And he said, oh, I'm a bit of choleric melancholy. I'm like, oh, okay. It's like, how do you even remember those words, much less
Oh, exactly.
they mean?
They're a mouthful or mindful at the best of times. So, the beauty of the DISC is it's simple words.
Yeah. And not that we're stupid people. Nobody that we work with is that way. It's just easier to remember.
It's more modern. The words are more modern, I guess you could say, and we understand them better.
Absolutely. So in 1928, we're going to fast forward from 400 BC to 1928. So we just covered eons, right? So in 1928, Dr. William Marston identified the DISC theory, what he called the DISC theory. So this is the first time that the word DISC or the acronym DISC has been used. And he used it first in a book that he wrote called The Emotions of Normal People. And it makes me wonder what the emotions of abnormal people are. But he wrote about the emotions of normal people. His DISC theory identified that while each of us is a combination of all four of these categories, we can connect our personality to varying degrees to each one of those. And he called them dominant, influencing, steady, and compliant. That's what the DISC stands for. Now we're going to dive into each one of those here in just a minute. But what kind of makes up our personality? Where does that come from? I think it's a blend. Who we are is shaped by our genes, our parents, right, our family, and what's been kind of physiologically given to us, from our environment, where we grow up, the belief systems around us, and our role models, those people who guide us along the way. Could be family could be friends, right? Role models could be just about anybody. So that blend is what makes us who we are, really. And using the framework of DISC, we can start to identify some of the patterns so that we then know what to expect. And if we know what to expect, we can use the right strategy to bring our best to work and relationship situations. So,
and for those who are thinking, surely those things that are affecting me will continue to affect me my whole life. The answer is yes, they do. You know, we said at the beginning, we're not going to put you in a box. So we're not saying you're a D or you're an I or you're an S or you're a C. You're always going to get a blend of them, but that blend can mix over time. And I mean, I'm an example. When I did this 10, 15 years ago, I was a DC, more of a DC mix. But over time, having had a family and my wife in my ear about being less D, which is your dominant personality, I'm now more CS. Sure, my D's still there, but it's just switched around a little bit. So it's okay for it to change, because it will change for the environments that you're working in as well.
Yeah, because your environment changes, and as the environment changes, and even as your role models change throughout your life too, you look up to different people as you go through your life and different things. Yeah, you can change. Most of the time, we tend to gravitate around a certain area, but yeah, the blend can just kind of mix a little bit, and we'll show you our graphs a little bit later in the session so you can see what we're talking about.
And I think that, you know, because of the journey I've been on with self-learning and being a better person for the clients that I work with, I've thought more about these things. So I know that from a dominant personality isn't always great. You know, it can actually be off-putting to people. So therefore, I've toned my D down and lifted my S up a bit. But for those who don't think about this and they're just naturally D, you'll spot them a mile off. Yep. In fact, most of these personality styles, you'll spot a mile off if they are pure.
Yeah.
Them, you know?
Which is unusual. We're mostly a blend.
Yeah.
I've run into one client over the last how many years I've been doing DISC who was one letter, and it was a D. And it was the first time I've seen a one-letter profile. I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was fascinating. And even culturally too, New Zealand is such a melting pot of people from all over the world. Moving here from the States, people in the States are much more loud and in your face, and a little more aggressive maybe. But moving here over the last 10 years, I've noticed that I've dialed back my loud out there-ness a little bit, just so that I don't bowl people over or scare them, right? So
yeah.
So it's interesting, even culturally within your team, if you've got people from around the world in different cultures, that's going to contribute to how they naturally behave, and understanding that's really important. Okay, so let's lay out really quickly the 4 DISC styles, and then we're going to dive into each one. So D-wired people, we're going to start up in that red upper left quadrant there. Your D-wired people are called dominant. They're outgoing and task-focused. So they're not afraid to be out front, taking the lead, and they're focused on the bottom line. Your I's, the upper right-hand side there, they're also outgoing, but they're people-focused. So again, not afraid to be out front, having fun, rather than focusing on tasks. Your S's, that lower right quadrant, is, they're called steady. And those folks are the engine room of a practice, or the engine room of a business, right? They're those folks who don't want recognition, but kind of go above and beyond to keep things ticking over. And your C's, which is your lower left quadrant, those are your thinkers. They're reserved, so they tend to be reserved and task-oriented, whereas your S's are reserved and people-oriented. They like to keep everybody happy. Your C's are task-oriented, so it's all about precision and detail. So let's dive in a little bit more to that.
Just while this one's up there, Jennifer, I think one thing we've found with the time we've spent on this is that generally the opposites don't attract in this case. So it's very unusual to find a DS mix, and very unusual to find a CI mix. It's just like that chalk and cheese. It just repel each other.
But you're meaning within someone's profile. Yes. Yep. So because those things are diametrically opposed, they don't often show up right together, which is what Craig's saying. The opposite side of that, though, is that you're going to have people on your team who are diametrically opposed. And that's what we want to dive into today, is like how to manage a little bit of that a little better. Remember the patterns, the animal patterns that I talked about a few slides ago. So we know that things can go really wrong when you make an assumption about someone without doing a little bit of homework and observing their behavior. You might get attacked, right? I think this guy probably walked up to the tiger and went, "Oh, come here, boy," right? So let's go forward and get a little bit more information so that we get ourselves out of danger with people who aren't like us. All right, so really quickly, now if we were all in a room together, I'd have you stand up and move to 4 different corners of the room, but that's just not possible right now unless you feel like moving around your office. But when we think about the 4 styles that I just shared with you, the D, the I, the S, and the C, if one of each was in a lift, what would they do? What's the D going to do?
Basically, stomp the button. I want to get to the room I'm going to, or the floor I'm going to.
Yeah, the D is going to be punching the buttons because they want to go faster. The I is probably still going to be chatting with somebody as they walk up to the elevator, right? They just can't end that conversation. The S, what's the S going to be doing in the elevator?
They're going to hold the door open to make sure no one misses out.
They're going to see the I coming, chatting to their friend and go, "I got the door for you." Yeah. And the C, what does the C do, Craig?
Probably what I do a little bit. You read the information in the elevator, whether it's specials that are on at the hotel you're in, or even better, the weight limits the elevator holds.
Are we going to make it? How many people are in here and what do they weigh?
I have found that they're never correct. If you put that number of people in, they're sort of all got to be half the weight of most people.
Oh, interesting. Ah, so they need to upgrade those to today's heavier people. Yeah. Interesting. So, all right. Now let's take that example and extrapolate it out to something just a little bit different. And so you can think about yourself over these next couple of questions. So apply what I'm saying to you, and we'll try to identify kind of your main characteristic.
It's interesting, when I was over at one of the conferences with John Maxwell, we'd gone through all this disc profiling, and over the rest of the week that we were there, when being a C type person, I would take note of what was happening in the elevator, and boy were they correct. You could tell straight away. Someone would get in and start punching the button. Someone would be languishing behind for whatever reason. You generally your eyes chatting away, and then your S would be hold on, these people. And it was just amazing that how true that example was. And when everyone finally got in the elevator, you'd basically have each other on about, well, you must be the D, you must be the I.
Oh, because you all knew. Yeah. It's so cool to be around a bunch of other people who are going through the same type of thing, because it's, you're doing that because. So this stuff is great to do with your team, FYI. So by the way, before we leave this empty elevator, this empty lift, if you're one of those folks who's happy enough to engage the people who step into the lift, or at least smile at them, then you're probably going to be on the upper half of that quadrant in the D or the I space, because they're outgoing type people. Or if you're on the opposite side and you just prefer an empty lift, you don't want to have to make eye contact with anybody, don't engage me in conversation, don't really care, then you're probably in the reserved or the lower half of that, which is that CS side. Fair enough? All right. So here we go with a couple of additional questions to help you kind of figure out where you sit. Let's think about going on a holiday for just a second. Are you someone who can't wait to look at the map and plot out the most efficient route to your destination? Identifying all the petrol stops along the way and where you're going to stop and take pictures. That probably means, if you prefer this method of vacation and holiday planning, that you're sitting on the D or C side of the matrix, that task-focused side. Getting things organized is the most important aspect of going on holiday. If, on the other hand, you hop in the car without a care and say, we'll find some place fine to sleep tonight, I don't care where we eat, we'll find some food, doesn't matter when we eat, you know, not filling up the gas tank on the way out of town, you're just going to find something along the way, you're probably someone who sits over on the people-focused side of things. You just want to have some fun and hang out with people you love or you like, right? So, task-focused, people-focused, outgoing or reserved, where are you sitting right now? And it'll become clearer to you as we go further. So let's flesh these out just a little bit more.
So to give you a live example of that, my wife and one of my children are in the brass band. They've got competitions in 2 months' time. And they've only just decided to go because of COVID and other things being cancelled. So I looked up where we were going, and it was like, not a heck of a lot of accommodation, and then found out what was going on. There's other festivals going on and things. I think, gee, we need to get in, because finding somewhere for a family of 5 to go can be difficult. So I kept saying to my wife, look, are you going? Let's have a discussion. Let's sort out who's going, etc.
Yeah.
One day lost, another day lost, another day lost. She came home the other night with because I said, this is a place I'm looking at. I'm going to book it. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Now it's 2 months out, but the problem is you get to a month out. Not only is the accommodation scarce, but what is available is 2 to 3 times the price. So it's not just a Cedar in me, it's my Scottish heritage.
So he's a Fee and a Scot. Look out. Yeah. So whether you like one or the other, yes, determines kind of how you plan and how you move forward. Are you spontaneous or are you not spontaneous? Let's dive into the D. And we've tried to pull in little pictures that kind of make sense for each of these profiles. And Craig found this guy. Yep. Whether you love him or hate him, he is a D, right? So he is somebody who exemplifies some of these qualities. So Ds really love control. They thrive on being in control. If they're in a group, they will naturally step up and take the lead. They make quick decisions. Sometimes they're the wrong decisions, but they make quick decisions. They're direct, and they focus on results. So people with super high D characteristics make up only, which is even more fascinating why I had this person who was just a D, make up only 3% of the worldwide population. Now, the company that we go through for this DISC, the DISC reports that we use, operates in, I don't know how many countries around the world, and they've normed and studied their models and their validity testing on 150 people from 150 countries. So it's really, robust with the research behind the information I'm giving you. So this 3% of the population around the world is D-wired, strong D-wired.
Interestingly enough, most people, when we've done this presentation before, will go, that's a bit light. Surely there's more. And I guess the reason being is they're probably the loudest in terms of being dominant, and so they probably stick out more. And it's sometimes the norm is that the minority overrule the majority because they just happen to be more dominant.
Yes, they're more vocal about it.
Yep.
Yeah. So people think there are more Ds than there are, perhaps. Yes. So a little bit more information about Ds. They're driven by the need and the desire for authority. They love to be right. Right? Ds love to be right. They have a very hard time admitting that they're wrong or that they've made a mistake. They will easily try to take control of any situation. It's all about them. They embrace any change that's going to help them get results because their focus is totally on what's going to happen. What's the end result? I want to get the result I want. Tell me how to get it, right? So they want changes in place that are going to help them get results. They're comfortable responding to direct confrontation. Most people who I've run across hate confrontation, right? And I think, for me, I think a robust conversation is just robust, because part of my D, right, part of my profile is D-ish. I have no problem with confrontation or having a conversation that is slightly uncomfortable with someone. It still feels a little uncomfortable, but it's just a conversation. I think too many people kind of view it as confronting, perhaps, when it's not meant to be confronting.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah. And they treasure loyalty, right? So, I'm the king of the hill. You're going to be loyal to me. If you're loyal to me, I feel like somebody who's a mobster. If you're loyal to me, I love you. If you're not loyal to me, I don't know. It might not go so well for you. You didn't think I'm
glad that's recorded. Yeah.
It's recorded for posterity. So their greatest fear, the D's greatest fear, is being taken advantage of. Hey, you told me you were going to do this and you didn't do this, right? Or you told me I was going to get this deal and I didn't get this deal. You charged me this instead. So D's really are, don't take advantage of me. Don't one-up me. Now, how do we communicate with somebody like this more effectively, right? Because your Ds are probably, for the majority of the population, who don't like confrontation, Ds tend to be kind of difficult. So what do we need to do? Ds have short attention spans. They're all about the big picture, right? So be brief, direct, and then get out. Get in, speak your piece, and leave. Because they're probably focused on a task or focused on, thinking 4 steps ahead of where you are. So yeah, bring your point in and take off. Ask what questions. So the most important thing to a D is what, right? They're giving direction. They're telling people what. So if you've got questions for a D, make sure they're what questions and not how questions, because a D doesn't know all the detail. He or she has other people to handle the how. They deal with the what. Ds are focused on results. So they want you to focus on results. Don't ramble, right? No extra conversation around the bullet points. Just give them the bullet points. And don't just discuss a problem, because they're not going to see that as valuable information. Discuss a problem and why it has a negative effect on an outcome, and then they'll listen to you. Hopefully that makes sense. So not that Ds are tyrants, right?
No, they just come across that way.
Sometimes they come across, you're right, as the scary people on the team.
Yep.
For a variety of reasons. So they generally aren't really interested in that social conversation, how your weekend went, how's family. If you've got a good relationship with one, yes, that's fine. But if you're just meeting a D, or if you're just identifying a D, try not to waffle or get into fluffy territory, because it won't be appreciated. So think about your team and your patients. Do you have somebody in mind who might be a D, right?
So I've got a client example where when I took the client over, most people were scared of him. And once we sort of thought through the personality profiling, we recognised he was a high D. And so once you knew that, you can actually start communicating with them on that basis. And I'll give you an example of communication. There was a day when he was asking for some information, and I said to him, look, I'm flat out. If I can get it to you tomorrow, I will. Otherwise, it'll be next week. So 3/4 of the way through the next day, which was the Friday, I sent him an email. I said, look, haven't had a chance to get to it. First thing Monday. And he sent back one word, fine. Now, what do you do with the word fine? Now, without knowing he was a D, you could think he's upset with me.
Fine.
Fine,
Yeah.
you haven't done it.
Yeah.
But realistically, he was just saying, it's okay, cool, cool. And we got them the information Monday, and he was all good about it. But, knowing he was a D, and that enabled us to know that the word that came back was not an attack or etc. It was just fine. That's his terminology. His name for me, whenever he talks to me, is High C. Not because I'm a high C, but he can't be bothered writing Craig.
Craig.
He just does C, or any of the team members, just their first initial, just the way they are.
Fast. I'm on to the, I can't spend a whole lot of time on this email, so I'm not even going to type the 4 letters of your name. So I'm just going to put C, and we're going to move on. Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the I quadrant. Remember, these people are outgoing and people-focused. So the I's are fun, friendly, persuasive, spontaneous, expressive. They like the spotlight. Those folks who wear colorful clothing and kind of like to be out front. Oh, look at me. These people are actually, it seems like there's probably a few more of these too, because they're louder than the rest of the population. They're only 11%. Those folks with really high tendencies are 11% of the worldwide population. So we're talking about smallish groups here so far. When we share with you our profiles a little bit later, as you learn a little bit as we go through this, you'll learn more of what Craig and I are, but we'll show you later. Can you think of someone who is an I, who tends to kind of fall into this category? They're relationship oriented. They tend to be animated and talk with their hands. They're good storytellers. They're encouraging. They're the kind of the cheerleader on the team. And they really treasure experiences with other people. That's kind of what makes life worth living for them, is the people around them.
So I'm just going to put a disclaimer in here now. I'm an accountant. Disclaimers are part of our life. The pictures you're seeing are our interpretation of people you might know. Who will fit into these roles. They have not done a personality profile with us, so we could be 100% wrong, but I'll guarantee you we're not.
We could be wrong, and so clarification in the disclaimer. Yeah, we don't personally know these people. We haven't profiled them, but we're guessing, right? If I put another face in there for a D, I'd put Donald Trump in there for a D, right?
But we don't put him in anything New Zealand.
Thank goodness, no. And I don't know him personally. So when you communicate with an I, how do you communicate better with an I? Oops, sorry, these are supposed to go bold. The I's greatest fear is rejection or loss of approval. They really like to be liked. So that's what they fear most. And when we talk about the important point of these slides being that greatest fear, our fears come out in how we behave. So if I'm really afraid of losing social approval, then I'm going to be, over the top nice, perhaps when I shouldn't be, in order to stop someone from not liking me. So that greatest fear kind of comes out in a number of different ways in all of our profiles. So, and the D, being afraid of being one-upped or kind of losing control or being taken advantage of, that's why sometimes that fear comes out in, ruling with an iron fist, my way or the highway kind of thing. So, do you know an I, right? So when you're communicating with somebody who is an I, hear them, acknowledge them, right? Don't do all the talking. Allow them to be verbal because that's what they are. Don't ignore their ideas because often I's are creative and they bring some good ideas to the table. They're big picture thinkers. They're not detail oriented. Allow time for socializing. So if you've got a patient who comes in for, a service and they're, something about them, you've done your homework, right? After being on this session, you've done a little more digging with the information we'll send you and you've identified that you think they're an I. That's the person who's going to be happy with a little social time. Tell them a joke. Ask how the weekend went. Tell them you got a new puppy, whatever. That's all good. It makes them feel comfortable. Follow up with details in writing. So if there's a treatment plan that you need to provide for a patient who is an I, don't tell them everything and expect them to retain it. Because again, short attention span, big picture thinkers, send the detail in an email and they can read it when they have a minute, right? Shorter discussions with I's rather than long discussions are going to sink in better.
So thinking through an I was doing this presentation recently and I wanted to give a picture of who an I was. Now my wife's cousin, talk about high I.
Yeah.
Talk, center of attention, rah, rah, rah. Now, obviously I'm not an I, or not high on my list of things, so you can see it like chalk and cheese again, keep using the terminology, but it was, because I'm a city who's an I. And we're driving, taking him around, because he's from England, so he'd come out to visit, and sightseeing, and he was talking so much, I actually said to him, how are you off in a room full of eyes? He said, what do you mean? So I explained it, just profiling. I said, if all of you guys are in a room and you're all talking so much, how on earth do you listen to what the other person's saying? So that was my take on the high I.
Yep. Yes. So yeah, it is difficult. I mean, when you've got two D's together, for instance, they're both going to want to be in control. So if they're both trying to plan something, it's going to be a little bit difficult for one to cede some, control to the other in order to get something accomplished.
But at least they'll hear each other because they're both short, sharp, and sweet.
Yeah.
Sharp eyes in the room, it's just all the time. It's like, how on earth are they getting anything done amongst that noise?
They're having lots of fun though. Okay. So the S, and this is just the S and the C are just, kind of file photos that I found. These aren't specific people that we know, but it kind of exemplifies the characteristics. S's are team oriented. They're really great at follow through. They're very loyal team members and friends, and they're very accepting, right, of all sorts of people. And this is a really statistic that really surprised me. 69% of the population in the world are generally or have high S tendencies. Okay, so if the whole world are S's, how do we get anything accomplished? Because nobody likes to have the hard conversation.
Well, I guess the flip side of that is because such a high percentage are S's, then the world does care about itself.
And there's maybe fewer wars than there would be if we had more.
Exactly.
Yeah,
less conflict.
Less conflict. All right, so S's really enjoy that team environment. They're awesome team players. They're generally easygoing and agreeable, but I will make a point there that if you've got an S on your team who you've broken trust with, look out. My daughter is an S, high S. And she's one of those folks that, boy, if you do something, she'll write you off. And that's it. Not going to speak to you again. And I've watched her do this with a couple of friends. It's like, oh, my goodness. So S's can be very sensitive, right? And hard to build trust with if you've misstepped. They're even-paced. They're good listeners. They're very compassionate. And they really treasure keeping the peace, keeping everything copacetic. Sometimes S's have trouble saying no. So you can, if you're someone who's delegating to an S, I would advise you to check in with them first before you give them something else to do, because they're going to say yes to you regardless of how overly busy they are. Check in with them first and make sure they've got the capacity to do it, and maybe say, hey, I don't need this immediately, so you can put it a little further out. So, because S's want to please.
That's right. And just for clarity, the S person in the picture is the person on the right.
Yes, the carer. Yeah. So the S's greatest fear is a loss of security and confrontation. So if they fear loss of security, then any change that's being proposed is not going to be met with a whole lot of enthusiasm if you've got a team full of S's. And the team here at Generate, yeah.
Yes, tough work sometimes.
Yes. Yep. So lots of change has been happening here in the technology space over the last couple of years with how the team works and getting digital and all that fun stuff. And they've done a great job because, you know, Craig, as the leader of the accounting team, is a forward-thinking early adopter. So, you know, putting new things to the S's, yeah, it's taken a little bit of time for everyone to soak it up and get on board.
Yeah, and I think one of the downsides to S is when you talk about loss of security, change. You know, if you're going to do change and you've got a lot of S's on board, then you have to really think about how you process that change.
Yep.
Because they need to be, if you don't have them on board, then they're off board.
They're off board. They're overboard. So when you communicate with an S, right, create a friendly tone for the discussion. If you're not feeling friendly, look friendly. Put a smile on your face before you go see them. Show interest in them as a person. Don't be overly loud or pushy or aggressive so that you can kind of minimize that potential for confrontation. Don't forget that they're more in tune to feelings than a lot of us are. So they tend to be quite sensitive. So if you're working on a project together, make sure that you give definition to the goal and to everyone's role within it, because S's, the most important question to answer for an S is how. How is this going to go? How's it going to work? How is this going to look? They really want the security of having the structure laid out for them. So it's very important. The I, just to step backwards a little bit, the most important question to answer for an I is who. Who's going to be doing it with us? Because it's all about the people. S's are all about how and structure. And of course, as Craig emphasized, give them time to adjust to any change, because it will take them time to digest new things.
And look, you know, we've said that a lot of my team here are high S's, but my wife's high S as well. And just because they're S's doesn't mean they're the same. Don't misinterpret what we're saying.
Yep.
It just means they've got a similar trait, but how they interact with it, how they work with it is different.
It expresses, yeah.
So, you know, my wife, you know, bless her, is very people orientated. You know, always putting another person first. So much so sometimes she'll tire herself out because she's putting everyone else first and herself last. Yep. And you just got to not so much acknowledge it, but know that you can work in with that.
Yep, absolutely. So when we're giving you these overviews of the main styles, the D, the I, the S, and the C, remember that everybody's a blend. So people, you know, 69% of people have S pretty high up somewhere in their profile, but that also means that they've got some I, some C, and some D. So how that all blends and how it expresses is totally unique to each individual. Yep. So C's, down in that reserved task-oriented quadrant, C's are compliant. They're rule followers. They're black and white thinkers, generally. Very analytical. Give me all the information. I want to read every piece of it. They love to plan, and as Craig admitted, he's a C, so he loves to plan the holiday and plan ahead and think ahead. And they're great on accuracy because they tend to be perfectionists, so precision is really, really important. C's make up 17% of the population. So again, one of those slightly smaller percentages, but really important to have on a team, because even though your C sometimes seems to be a wet blanket on an idea, they're actually somebody who can be your devil's advocate and say, is that really a good idea? Let's really think through that and how it looks in real life, and then we'll see if that makes sense. So,
for those C's watching this, those percentages all add up to 100.
Absolutely. Craig, make sure. Yeah, they're thinking in their head, okay, so we had 17, 11, 3, and 69. So C's seek an environment that honors facts and logic. So again, our C-wired friends are compliant, conscientious, they're accurate, detail-oriented, and really value perfection. Now, my husband is a C, so isn't that interesting? So married to a C, S, who, CD, CS, yep, who has incredibly high standards for himself and for how he works. Sometimes, here's my example, right? So sometimes he struggles with people who work for him that they don't have that same work ethic and that same standard of performance. So that's something that he really struggles with because he's such a perfectionist and so invested in doing things right. It's interesting. So their greatest fear of a C is criticism. And criticism because the C has spent a whole lot of time making sure that they've done it right. So if you criticize it, that's going to be really threatening for them. Wait a minute, I put a lot of time into that. I know it's right. Which earlier, you made a comment a little bit earlier about something. You're like, well, that might be wrong, but no, I know it's right. Because we know anyway, but yeah. So when we look at our profiles, communicating with a C. See, I'm an I, right? I'm giving you this ahead of time because I'm just a little bit disorganized. So communicating with a C, you need to provide all the details. They want all the details. So give them everything you've got, all the handouts, everything that goes along with the treatment plan. Take this home, read it, digest it, love it, and then come back to me with questions. So use validated facts. Don't use hearsay or opinion. Make sure that the information you give them is factual. Be precise in your explanation, be very specific, and be patient. They're going to have lots of questions and may want to dig deeper to understand what you've given them. And the most important question that you're going to need to answer for them is why. Why is this a good idea? Prove it to me. That's what's really important to a C.
So I had a team member once who was very much C. Always wanted to know how, why, why does a computer spit this out? Why does it do this? And it drove me crazy because at a certain point in time, I'm a C, as you know, you've got to accept what comes out. So I gave her the example. When you drive a car, do you need to know how all of the engine works, how all the electrics work, or do you just get in, turn the key, clutch, if you've got one, brake, etc. That's all you need to know. So there's a certain level of stuff below the scenes you don't need to know, but a real high C will need to. Yep. So understanding that can help you track through your communication with it.
Yep. So if you are someone who's not detail oriented, step up the level of detail when you talk to a C. Now, when we think about our profiles, we've obviously done our own discs. And when you get a disc from people like us who are certified to do disc, you get a comprehensive disc. It's 30 plus pages and it's called an extended disc. And you'll see that when you get your disc result in this way, you get 3 graphs. So the 3 graphs, I'm going to explain to you really briefly because you may want to do this for yourself. The 3 graphs, the one that you're seeing on the left-hand side there, graph number 1, it's what we call our mass, or what we think others expect to see. So for me, I think that others expect me to have very little attention to detail, which is why the C is so low, and that, that I like change. So the S is low, right? I'm okay with change, it's good. The I is really high because I'm kind of loud and expressive and out there. And the D is also above the line. I'm not afraid to step forward and take control of the situation. The middle graph, graph number 2, is our natural, kind of how we're hardwired. And that's how we tend to behave when we're put under pressure or stress or in a place where we need to make a decision. and it's an important decision. So that graph basically shows that those tendencies that we have tend to move a little bit. So when I'm under stress with this middle graph, what it says is, okay, cool, you're generally not a detail-oriented person, but when you need to make an important decision, you do want more detail because that C increases and comes up a little bit. So give me a little bit more detail. So when you look at these graphs, and basically the third graph is a bit of a hybrid of the two, and this is the graph that gives us our name, you know, the persuader or the ID profile up here, because it's saying, okay, your I and your D are above the midline, so those are your primary characteristics. So I'm a persuader or an ID because those are my strongest characteristics. Craig, on the other hand, is a CS or a precisionist. So his above the line qualities are that steady and compliant quality, the S and the C. Now, the D, as he was talking about earlier, he's got D there. It kind of rides on the midline, but you know, you can see where it changes a little bit over time.
It used to be above my S. And I think because of the business I'm in and the people I connect with, I've pushed the D down so I can connect with more styles.
Yep.
And so that's what you're seeing on the left-hand one, the one I operate in, versus my natural one sort of puts it on the line.
Yep. So the interesting thing about how this has helped the two of us to be more effective at communicating is just understanding how we're hardwired. When you understand how you behave naturally and how someone else behaves naturally, then hurt feelings go out the window, misunderstandings lessen, expectations are clearer. It's just so much easier to understand why someone else is doing something.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, my son just recently did one of these because he's looking at a job promotion. He said, well, look, he's the same as me.
Really?
Which is interesting, but even though he's a CS like I am.
Sorry, this is news to me.
Yep. If you look at the graph, we're quite different in the graph. So his I is a lot higher than mine, but it's not above the line. So his C and S is still higher, and you can see that in how he communicates and what he does. So don't let even the CS put you in a box. Because we've got another person at work here who's a CS, who's quite different to me. But they're your main traits out of the four, but it's how that graph looks that determines. And when you read through the report, you go, yeah, that's right, yep. And his report's slightly different to mine, obviously, because our graph is slightly different.
But he's also a precisionist.
He is, and when you think about what he does, it's dead on.
Yeah.
And he's not an accountant.
No, he's not an accountant, no. So no, it's fascinating how you can be the same title or same profile on the face of it as someone else, but you're individual. Everyone's a unique individual, and how that expresses with you based on heredity, environment, and your role models, that all expresses differently. So that means that one CS is not going to look just like the next CS, and one ID is not going to look just like the next ID, right? So that being said, the biggest gap is the gap between knowing and doing. So if all you do from today is learn these human behavior patterns and never really implement or go back to them and think about them in order to connect better with others and improve your relationships, then our time today's kind of been wasted. So I'm really sorry. What we want to do today to make sure that doesn't happen is, if you're on the webinar today, I will email you a PDF copy of something that we hand out physically at events, but they're disc reference cards. So basically it's a way where you can remind yourself what are the main characteristics of each D, I, S, and C, and how to communicate more effectively with each one of those. So some of the tips that we went through about being brief or not providing too much detail, that sort of stuff is on these cards. So they're really great reference cards to go back to, print out, and practice with your team and with your family.
Well, I'm going to just jump in here and say, look, PDF version is fantastic. We actually have some made up. So if you would prefer some that are made up, they're sort of wallet size, we're happy to post them to you. Even though New Zealand Post is not the way to do things necessarily today, but these are ready made up, awesome to have with you as sort of that thinking through. So if your preference is post, just get onto us through either the chat or email us and say post instead of PDF. That'd be great.
Brilliant. So, but wait, there's more. There's always more with us, right? So in just a second, I'm going to share with you how you can have your own 30-page extended disc. profile that comes with customized suggestions, questions for self-reflection on how you can improve your communication. Hang around, I'll tell you how to do that. But first, I'm going to do a really quick sneak peek into some content from a full workshop that we offer called The Maxwell Method of Leadership for Engaging and Productive Meetings. Now, that is a way too long of a title. Yes. So I'd rather call it, keep your team from falling asleep at meetings. Yep. Or something like that. But we're going to go really quickly into a couple of tips that can help you run better meetings, because I know you guys have meetings, probably weekly ones or quarterly ones. Here we go. Here's some few tips that you can take away that will help you. So we've all been in meetings that have been a waste of time. People are falling asleep, they're checking their phones, they're doing email, and when the meeting finally ends, because it's run over time, nothing gets followed up on. Right? What a waste of time. So if you're in charge of scheduling meetings in your practice, here are 4 key questions to ask yourself before you even book the meeting into everybody's diary. Question number 1. Ask yourself, do we even need to have a meeting about this issue, or is this something I can have a discussion with one-on-one, or maybe something we can sort through a phone call or an email exchange? Once you've made the decision to have a meeting, that there is a purpose for it, then you need the right people at the meeting. Who needs to be there? You can really maximize the productivity of that meeting by kind of strategically picking who attends, because some meetings don't require everyone to be present in order to get the result that you want. The people that you want there are really people who kind of add value to other people's thoughts, and they can add on to those, and they can reflect on what's been said, and it really kind of add value. And you want folks who, when they go away, they take ownership of their contribution to that meeting and say, okay, this is all about we, not about me. So ideally, that's what you want to include in your meetings, because they're going to be more productive. That third question to ask yourself is, what's the desired outcome? What's the goal? Sort this out before you even book that meeting in, and then share it with everyone who's attending, so everyone's on the same page. This is what we want to achieve by having this meeting. And lastly, what's that old saying about when you fail to prepare, fail to plan, you plan fail. Then it's, don't wing it. How do you need to prepare for your meeting? And so make sure that you do it ahead of time and not just 5 minutes before the meeting starts. All right, so put a little thought into it. So speaking of meeting preparation, there are a few steps you need to take to kind of ensure that you're setting yourself and your team up for success when you go into that meeting. And we're going to cover 3 of them here really quickly. But if you'd like to hear a bit more, tune in next month. So for August's webinar, we're going to go through this entire team effective meetings training, right? So we're going to squeeze all of that, or as much as we can, into the 45 minutes to an hour that we have next month.
I think, to be fair, 2 minutes left. I think what we do is very quickly give the headings, and they can catch it up next time. Because we've promised to be under an hour. We do promise to be in under an hour, don't we, Mr. C? Yes. Yep. Okay, so here we go. Is this, how did I go backwards? Who's there again? Use the other mouse.
Oh, that's weird. Sorry, team. Here, I'm going backwards for some reason, so let's go forward again. All right, meeting preparation. Have an agenda. Have a way to handle side conversations for those people that consistently want to just talk to their neighbor, and expect different communication styles. Know that some people in there are going to need to know why. Some people are going to need to know what. Some people are going to need to know who, and some people are going to need to know how. And that's really important for you as the organizer and the person who's in control of that meeting to know. All right, cool. Q&A. If you've got a question, type it in Q&A. I'm going to come to it really quickly. If you would like a disc profile for yourself, 30 pages, your strengths, your challenges, how to communicate better with those people who aren't like you, and do's and don'ts when people are communicating with you that you can print out and post up on your door or on your cubby, plus a power disc section, which tells you what areas of leadership are your real strengths and which you might need to work a little bit on. If you'd like one of those, right? Normally we charge out $125 for that today. For those of you that are on the webinar, we're giving it to you for $89. If you want one, right? This is customized to you. Send us an email. Craig and Jennifer at generate.solutions, put DISC in the subject line, and I'll get back to you and get that sorted within 24 hours. Sweet. So, questions. I'm going to check really quickly. Go to my little toolbar. Brilliant. So here's what's coming up for August, September, and October. We've got the Engaging and Effective Meetings training in August. the power of teamwork in September, and staying out of overwhelm for October. So if you've got any questions whatsoever, you know how to get in touch with us. And that's us for the day. It's 1 o'clock on the dot.
It's 1 o'clock on the dot. Okay, guys, back to work.
Back to work.
Thanks for your time, and we'll see you next time.
Hi, Jen Myers here. I hope you enjoyed that video and it got you thinking about how to implement that topic into your practice. If you have any questions whatsoever, myself or Craig, we are more than happy to answer questions for you and help you understand how to apply what you've just watched and what you've just heard into your specific practice in your unique situation. So please click the button that says book a meeting, and we are more than happy to spend a few minutes with you going through the information and how you can apply it. So thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.